The tournament responding, "We are sorry and sad."
We're sorry because it's a pain in the arse, and we're sad because we're going to fine you. With Naomi Osaka withdrawing from the French Open and players being booed for taking the knee, conversations around sport, mental health and race are at an all-time high. But are the gestures that are being made meaningful, and what is really generating the problems that these gestures purport to address?
Naomi Osaka, the number 2 ranked player in the world, has just withdrawn from the French Open. Osaka had been fined $15,000 for refusing to do the traditional post-match news conferences, citing her mental health. But Grand Slam tournament directors responded by threatening her with more substantial fines and future Grand Slam suspensions.
What I think is interesting about the Naomi Osaka story is it brings to the forefront a kind of tension that exists between big companies and media organisations claiming to care about mental health while actually creating the conditions that exacerbate and worsen people's mental health. Yes, in the case of elite athletes, and significantly in the case of ordinary people. I think it's going to change the way that the conversation around mental health happens, and possibly midwife a transition from banal, empty, trivial gestures that change nothing, potentially into a space where meaningful transitions have to be examined. The same can be said around taking the knee and the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, racial inequality is a serious issue, just as mental health is a serious issue. But just how much impact can you have on the issues of mental health and race through gestures that do not address the fundamental problems and causes of the tensions in these areas? Nesreen Malik, writing in The Guardian, said, "We still argue about the most basic ways of showing support for causes such as mental health and taking the knee, about whether we believe people's mental health claims. What is becoming clear is that there's a broad consensus that racism is bad and that we need to take care about mental health, but very little appetite for actually doing anything to make the world fairer or more accommodating." See, the fact is that when Naomi Osaka said she ain't going to do interviews no more, the Tennis Federation wanted to sue her. The media want to penalise her, because by confronting the idea that the media generates mental health problems simply through the discourse it has with her through interviews, you have to start looking at the causes of mental health problems. And the causes of mental health problems are not individual or localised, they're a kind of pandemic and caused by complex relationships between corporate sponsorship, media partners and the sport itself, which is ever more increasingly about the economics behind the sport than the activities that take place on the field or the pitch. An obvious example is the sort of sponsorship that we see. The Euros are coming up. You're likely to see McDonald's and Coca-Cola emblazoned all over a tournament that's about physical excellence. If sport really cares about the health, fitness, mental and physical of its viewers and participants, you would surely look at the sponsorship, wouldn't you? You'd say Coca-Cola is not good for you. McDonald's is not good for you. Therefore, we can't accept sponsorship from McDonald's and Coca-Cola. But you can never do that. There's a fundamental paradox, a gridlock at the core of this issue, in that the media, the sport and the corporations all need one another. So Naomi Osaka, in naming the problem, creates an intransigent mess, because you can't deal with Naomi Osaka's mental health simply by withdrawing her from interviews, because you start to pull at the foundations of this whole house of cards. The same with the sport. If fans start booing taking the knee, perhaps because of a racist impulse, or perhaps because of an intuition that is an empty gesture that they're being expected to shoulder, while the sport itself does not fundamentally change. If you care about racism in sport and the treatment of non-white, black, ethnic minority players, then one way that that could be addressed is ensuring that you see more black managers, more black and ethnic people represented at the level of the boardroom, more initiatives and incentives that change the lives of black and ethnic communities, and indeed people of all colours that come from an economic underclass, the real fans of those sports. But to address those problems will impact profit, and you can never impact profit. That is the paradox at the core of this problem. Or not a paradox, a lie at the core of the problem. And the fact is that they do not care about race in a deep and meaningful way. They do not care about mental health in a meaningful way. They just need to appear to care about race and mental health. If you need to appear to care about mental health, there's some gestures. Here's some empty and banal initiatives. If you want to appear to care about race, have players take the knee, but don't address the structural issues that cause these problems and exacerbate the conditions of people that suffer as a result of racism. So these two issues, the booing and Naomi Osaka refusing to participate in the interviews, are bringing to a head a problem at the core of spectacular capitalism and its relationship with media. It can never address these issues directly without fundamentally affecting its own interests and indeed raison d'etre to continue to make profit. You can never challenge that ideal. The late, great Mark Fisher wrote extensively about the way that we regard mental health as an individual problem as opposed to a social and cultural problem. He had these things to say. The pandemic of mental anguish that afflicts our time cannot be properly understood or healed if viewed as a private problem suffered by damaged individuals. It has to be understood as a social and cultural problem. Why are there pandemics of mental health problems? What's causing it? Where is it coming from? What's generating it? Even if you start to examine the individual case of Naomi Osaka, you'll realise that she doesn't want to be asked loads of personal questions. She doesn't want to be undermined. She doesn't want to be attacked. But if she tries to withdraw, corporate sponsorship will be affected. Media views will be affected. So the whole edifice is challenged by this stance. And what is revealed by that is that her mental health, your mental health at large is just a necessary casualty in the pursuit of the invisible ideals of what we're calling capitalism, but it's actually something way beyond it, and in Mark Fisher's terminology, late capitalism. This isn't just about, we're providing a service and we should be rewarded for it and paid for it. This is not that. This is obscene profits garnered by a very elite group, while ordinary people, and even, it seems, elite athletes, are sacrificed because these are expendable components ultimately.
In a candid statement on social media, the 23-year-old shared she had suffered long bouts of depression since the U.S. Open in 2018. She said she often wears headphones, which help dull my social anxiety. I'm not a natural public speaker, she wrote.
If you're not a natural public speaker, don't play tennis for a living. Try and play tennis then. It's part of your job. It's part of your job to public speak if you play tennis. Of course, the counter-argument, you earn all that money. All right, fair enough, but little girl growing up playing tennis, she wanted to play tennis. Turns out she's really, really good at it. You can't, the whole way through that process, by the way, there'd be points where you have to sacrifice your mental health, all right? What? I just wanted to play tennis. Shut up! Get on with the tennis. Stop whining. Get on with it. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Of course, highly paid people are earning money, but the slow transition for you are earning that money because you're bloody good at tennis to you're earning that money because you're willing to stand and be on a screen and be undermined, ridiculed, attacked, made anxious, used as a product, objectified. When was the consent for that matter? When did that transition take place? We've all been eased into that through like a process of commerce and commodification and beautifully managed campaigns. But how did we end up here? How did we end up at the point where it's necessary for an athlete to accept that part of your job is to be treated as a kind of an object and a commodity?
The tournament responding, we are sorry and sad.
We're sorry and we're sad about that. We're sorry because it's a pain in the arse, and we're sad because we're going to fine you.
Wishing her the quickest possible recovery.
I enjoyed this from Nesreen Malik's article. She said, liberal goodwill towards causes and general cluelessness about structural remedies mean that we live in a climate where we seem to be talking about these issues all the time, creating the impression of a society saturated with sympathy and solidarity, but really quite hostile to change. We're encouraged to practice self-care, but are limited in how we cater to ourselves without engaging with a system that heals us little and harms others plenty. Our diversions, meals and shopping are delivered by those on less than minimum wage, by others on 0 hours contracts, on behalf of companies leveraging those exploitations for profit. So with just a little examination, both the taking the knee and the feelings engendered by it, and Naomi Osaka's stance can begin to be seen not as like individual aberrations, but necessary and clear symptoms of systemic problems that can never be addressed. This is why we have the plethora of highly promoted gestures and why anybody that criticizes them is attacked. No one could say anything as bold as there is not a historic connection between football fans and racism. That does to some degree appear to exist. However, it's also clear that the taking the knee is a gesture that, whilst it might make people feel good about not being racist, a good, necessary and noble goal, by the way, in my opinion, it isn't actually addressing the problem itself. It certainly isn't addressing inequality, because it's being mobilized by huge corporations, and huge corporations are what creates inequality. They rely on the necessary centralization of wealth and profit. That can never ever be anything but an exacerbating factor for inequality. And it is economic inequality that primarily underwrites the problems of racism and mental health. This is the masked fact, because if you start to address economic inequality, you necessarily impact the interests of the powerful. If you deal with wellness and mental health through gestures, even nice cozy stuff like meditation, doesn't impact the interests of the powerful. In fact, they can profit from it further. If you have nice branded protests taking the knee, that doesn't affect the interests of the powerful. Big corporations can get behind that. They can support that. They're not affected by it. But if you start to say, hey, why don't you pay your workers properly? Why don't you employ at a meaningful level people from these kind of backgrounds, black and white, from poor economic backgrounds? Why don't you promote them? Why don't you, instead of prioritizing the accumulation of profit, prioritize instead social initiatives that have a cost to you, a meaningful cost that affects your bottom line? This cannot be done because the ideology will not permit it. Notice there will be more and more phatic gestures that cause more social tension and no real solutions offered, because the real solutions cannot be brought about without affecting the interests of the powerful. Always apply that mental paradigm to it. How does what they're doing affect profit or their interests? If it doesn't do that at all, it's an empty, meaningless gesture, even though the goals that it claims to support may be right. And obviously, in the case of people's mental health and racial equality, are desirable, noble, necessary goals that will never be meaningfully addressed by gestures. That's part of the point. If you enjoyed that video, would you like and subscribe? And look, actually, it does help if you do the notifications. That's the only way we can ensure that you get to see them. I don't want to contribute to the racket in your mind and the ringing bells in your life. God knows that's true. But I do want you to see my content and my videos. So yeah, turn on the notifications if you can, and comment, tell us what you want us to talk about and what you think about what we're talking about. Accuse me of being a Mason if you get off on that kind of thing. And also sign up for my mailing list at russellbrand.com so I can keep in touch with you about live shows. I'm doing live shows in the UK. There's loads of stuff to tell you. All right, thanks.